You're fairly new to the church. We are so glad that you're here. Please join us for coffee and conversation downstairs after the service. We would love to get to know you. Additionally, if you haven't already done so, please fill out the visitor card and place it in the offering plate later in the service. This will help us better serve you and answer any questions that you may have about our congregation. If you have children, as I do, childcare is available at the back of the sanctuary, and we will collectively learn from a short children's story about halfway through the service. Let's begin with a few announcements. Very important one to make if you haven't already known. We are now under a new minister as of July 1st. Welcome Reverend Jim Cawley. Open office hours and his fall schedule will be announced this coming August. There's a board meeting this Tuesday, July 8th at 6 p.m., open to any member if you want to come check it out. Blue Sky Waukesha Civics classes goes on. If you're not familiar with this, I have yet to go to one, but I very much want to. They offer these free classes at the congregation to really just inform, educate, empower you in all the different workings of civics and politics, and it's a really educational opportunity if you want to check it out. Thursday, July 10th. 6:30 to 8:30 here at the congregation. Also very important announcement next Sunday. Please do not come here. Please go to UU Church West in Brookfield. Their starting time is also different from ours. It's also in your order of service. The starting time is 10 a.m. So if you'd like to, please go there. We will see you there. And the farmers markets, it's been really great. We've gone a couple of times. My family actually went this past Saturday. You can see in the photo there. The last Saturday of each month is when they set up and just engage people in the community. Last week, over 30 plus people stopped by, which I think is really great to just get our name out there and meet the community, let them know what we're all about. But we do need volunteers if you want to set up, if you want to tear down, or just be an ambassador at the booth. It's really simple. You're just there to smile and say hello to some people and give out some free things. You guys can talk to Rusty about that if you'd like, or also on the banister down the stairs. You guys can sign up to volunteer. I would really appreciate that. Are there any other announcements that I'm unaware of that anyone wants to share with the congregation, or that we may have missed? Okay. Every Sunday, we formally mark the beginning of our service by lighting our chalice. Throughout history, the flaming chalice has been viewed as a symbol of religious freedom, a memorial of those who sacrificed their lives for religious liberty, and a reminder of our Christian roots of Unitarianism and Universalism. Please join me in unison as prompted on the slide after the following words. So I will read where it says facilitate, and you guys would please join in where it says all. May this flame light our path to fruitful knowledge and help us develop right attitudes of mind and spirit. Our community teaches us to put religion into action. Our principles illuminate paths to moral character and guide us to protect the weak against aggression of the strong. And now I invite you to receive our call to worship. Oh, that's fun. It's supposed to be a lot bigger. Call to Worship in Action by Sharon Wiley. I don't know why it's showing up small, but this one is from Sharon Wiley this morning. It is said that ministers are here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I say we are all afflicted and we are all comfortable. May our time together this morning be a comfort and a confrontation. May we here find peace in times of tumult. May we here invite tumult into lives of peace. May we here find calm in times of restlessness. May we here allow restlessness to evolve into action. Let this be the place you consider what you've never considered. Let this be the place you imagine for yourself something new and unthinkable. May this hour bring dreams of new ways of being in the world. Come, let us worship together. Please rise in body or spirit as we sing hymn number 1026, If Every Woman in the World. And now, can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. And now I move into a time of sharing our joys and sorrows, our celebrations and our struggles. For it is in our vulnerability that we experience true connection with and compassion for one another. If you have something to share, please come forward to the microphone, tell us your name and what's on your mind. As you do so, take a stone from the empty bowl, and when you are finished, place it in the bowl with the water. There it will join the other stones and create ripples, carrying your concerns out to the wider community.
Hi, I'm Michael. I have a joy to share. So far, we've taken in $5,500 towards the mortgage. So with Mike's matching thing, we paid $11,000 down on our principal last week. So keep the money coming, guys.
We should always have an update on cats, right? In this past week, Lily Byrigger's cat, Lily moved to a different situation where she couldn't have a cat, so we said we would take her cat. And I have had 14 cats in my life, and many of them have come different ways, and they all come with their personalities, and they usually come a little bit skittish. And I want you to know that you can trust your children with Lily, because this is the calmest, most curious, happiest, and just groovy cat I have ever known. And she lived with Lily for 7 years. She's not afraid of anything, and she doesn't go fast. And people deserve credit for calm cats.
Hi, my name is Lily. As y'all know, I did move to a new place. I'm in a group home now. It's been the best thing for me. I've bonded with all the people there, and I couldn't ask for a better place to be than there. And thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you.
I thought she was going to do an announcement. I just heard her voice from across the sanctuary. And now I will place one last stone for all those joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, but in our hearts and minds. Let us carry all of these into the days ahead. Please join in singing our response. And now, for the time you've all been waiting for, time for all ages, I would like to invite our children to the front of the sanctuary for our time for all ages. And I believe it's just my lucky two. Today we'll be reading Oliver Octopus and the Unwinnable Game by Ben O'Con. Okay, Oliver Octopus and the Unwinnable Game by Ben O'Con. We're going to be discussing equity and equality today. I'm going to read this time. On a beautiful Saturday morning at sea, young Oliver swam high and low. His octopus arms swirled around and around as he shot past the coral below. "Oliver, stop, you're just who I need," Sue Stingray called up from the floor. I need help with my friends. Can I get your advice? Those cavefish are acting so sore. We've decided to play my new dart games all day, but they suddenly ran out of time. I was having such fun, but they left every one. Tell me, what could have been my big crime? You played dart games? Asked Oliver, scratching his head. I imagine that you must have won. Maybe they left when the game felt unfair, because unwinnable games are not fun. But what was unfair? All the darts were the same, and the players stood back the same distance. Our targets, exactly the same shape and size, and no one had extra assistance. But your friends are all cavefish, the octopus said, and the cavefish don't even have eyes. Your eyesight is great. You can play with great aim. You're controlling the way the dart flies. You were born to be better at throwing those darts. Just look at your tail with its prong. You aim every day with that sharp dart-like spike. You've ignored your array all along. Why should I care? I'm sure it was fair. Is it really my fault I'm the best? We had the same rules and they still lost the game. They shouldn't be feeling so stressed. Oliver said, let's just think this one through. What if you couldn't compete? Here, take some shells. Can you juggle them well? If you can, then your dinner's my treat. You're on, the ray grinned, now determined to win. I'm taking you up on your bet. She juggled some shells for a very short spell, then she dropped them, which made her upset. My turn, replied Oliver, grabbing 8 shells as he tossed them with circus-like flair. He juggled the shells for what felt like a year, then Sue shouted, that's really not fair. Oliver quipped, but I followed the rules and I easily conquered the game. But you have 8 arms, Sue replied with alarm. The odds were not close to the same. Ah, now you can see, in effect you agree. Fair rules aren't the end of the story. Some creatures don't have the head start that you do. It's harder for them to earn glory. Equality is what you were talking about when you said that you had won the game fairly. You felt that your friends had identical tools and you conquered the game fair and squarely. But you have an edge over cavefish, my friend. The same rules will not always be fair. Each creature deserves what they need to succeed. That's equity, terribly rare. In darts, you could move the line closer for them and then turn them towards where they should throw. The cavefish could then aim their dart the right way, not just randomly let the dart go. It's a topic that's tricky without any doubt. True equity is quite hard to find. For example, I can't give you octopus arms, and you can't make a cavefish not blind. But it helps to be humble and stay well aware that we're really lucky in ways some are not. So whenever we do have a chance to help out, be sure everyone has a fair shot. Sue wanted to find a new way to be fair, and she saw why her friends were annoyed. Yes, honey? Okay. Sue wanted to find a new way to be fair, and she saw why her friends were annoyed. She made a new game that was fair to them all, pinned the tail on the whale they enjoyed. So the topic we discussed today was equity versus equality. Saphira, if you had to describe the word equality, being equal, would you describe it a certain way at all?
Well, everybody's different. Some people can't see and some people can. So you probably need a game that everybody has the same chance, like what they did. The cavefish couldn't see, and so they made a game that they could all not see, so nobody could see, and everybody was having the same equality.
That's very good. So what you described is actually, I think, more appropriately titled equity. So I would describe maybe equality as people having the same value and worth. And equity I would maybe describe a little differently. But I want to challenge the congregation because it's a time for all ages. Who wants to take a stab? If they were to define, we'll start with equality. Just in your own words, who wants to take a stab at it? How would you define equality? Who wants to be brave? Winner, winner, chicken dinner. I think this will carry down here. I feel like I'm on a game show.
I will take a stab at it because we do discuss equity and equality for our kids in school. And so equality might mean that we give the same lesson to every kid. But if the lesson, if one kid needs extra help to learn from that lesson, then that's equity. But equality is, well, I give everybody the same lesson, but that lesson isn't going to reach that other person yet. So we need to find it would be like having a math class and start saying everybody has to begin with trigonometry. And that would be equality. But if you're saying, well, somebody needs to learn algebra before they can learn trigonometry, then we will provide them the extra resources to do that, then that's equity. Does that work?
I think that works. What about someone else in their own words? Take a stab.
Yeah, I would agree with that, John. And similarly, I heard an example given, equality would be everyone gets a bicycle. Everyone gets the same, bicycle. But again, maybe not everyone has two legs. Maybe not everyone has eyesight. Maybe someone can't use one side of their arm. So maybe someone would need more like a tricycle or some type of more adaptation or accommodation. That would be more equitable versus equal, where again, everyone gets the same bike, or like you said, the same lesson or whatever.
That's great. One more? I think it's really good to hear in people's own words, because I know for me, sometimes they can get muddied between the two, equality versus equity. Anyone else? This will be our last one.
I would say equality would mean the same conditions for everyone, and equity would mean the conditions meet the person's abilities.
I like that. Thank you for participating. I think for me, I think of equality very much as kind of like a value and a worth of all people. And I think for equity, I think of things like fairness, even playing fields. Our family's watching the morning show, I should say, my family. Me and my spouse are watching the morning show on Apple TV, and it discusses this topic of people of color, for example, not getting paid the same as those that aren't, or women versus men, et cetera. And you can be more equitable to say, hey, just because you have a color of your skin, religion, background, et cetera, we need to make sure that that's even. But thanks for participating, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Please join in singing our response. A new slide, yay. Each week we take up an offering to support our staff, the operation of our building, and the many ministries of our church. There are two very simple ways to give. One, by utilizing the offering plate this morning, and two, by giving online at uniteduc.org/giving, also accessed by scanning the QR code on the slide and in your order of service. As a reminder, as we heard earlier, an update for our mortgage fundraiser, I believe it's in the foyer and also on the slide here. We have a visual aid for our current, what we're up to. And currently, I believe it's over $5,500. So we'll probably try to make sure we regularly let you guys know where we're at with that. Thank you for all who faithfully give through pledges, donations, time, and talent. We are forever grateful for your commitment and generosity to United. The morning offering will now be received.
Thank you all for having me again. I'm Reverend Denise Cawley. My pronouns are she and her, and it's a joy to be with you today. Today I'm going to tell you about one of my heroes, and I hope she'll become one of yours. When I wonder what to do in ministry, I kind of imagine Reverend Florence Buck sitting on my shoulder and think about what would she do. And she has some ties to your congregation, and I'm going to tell you about those. She's one of our religious ancestors, and she was one of the very first women ministers in America, and she came to ministry as a second career. You thought we were only doing this now at people like me, but she was first a school teacher and then a principal. She had her master's degree, which she had earned around 1860, which is pretty impressive. And she went to Baptist College, which is now Kalamazoo College in Michigan, if any of you have heard of that. And she was very skilled in the sciences and math, and she also was literate in Greek and Latin, and she often tutored seminary students who attended Baptist seminary there. And she met, she had quite an experience going and visiting a Unitarian Universalist church. And I'll tell you about all of that. But I'm going to start, I'm always like, what are they whispering about? Should I know? So this is Florence Buck. And I have a picture of a horse, because you need to think about, as I tell you all the things that she did, she didn't have a car, all right? So she rode horseback, she took trains places, and so I just want you to kind of get a picture of the timing of all this. Now, she spent her longest ministry over in Kenosha. So she was one of the most well-known ministers at what is now called Bradford Church UU in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's not what it was called then, but she spent a lot of time on Lake Michigan. And because she was from Kalamazoo, Michigan, she was only about 45 minutes from the opposite side of Lake Michigan. So our waters were very important to her. She would have rode streetcars in Kenosha that looked just like these. And you can go ride models of the same cars in Kenosha today. They have them operating, and it's pretty fun to go around the downtown area. And you can imagine that one of our religious ancestors was riding on those. Now, she had a scientific background. I'm giving you all some background information before I read the first reading, because I want you to have a better picture of where these words were said. Now, in this picture here, that is where Carthage College is now, in Kenosha. And she and her partner, Marion Murdoch, we'll get to her in a minute, and Mrs. Simmons and Mr. Simmons of Simmons Mattress would go birding. So he was the president of the congregation, and they thought it was just lovely to go birding, and she was a treasure to go birding with because she knew so much science and knew the names of so many birds. And I believe those were Jones Island, but not the Jones Island we think of. It's a different island down in Kenosha that has all this nature on it. And let me back up to that picture. Even that we have this picture is because Mr. Simmons owned a camera. Okay, so think about that too. Like this would have been around 1905, and he had a camera and took these gorgeous pictures that are in the archives in Kenosha. So that's pretty incredible. And then I pair that in this slide with a modern picture, and then with them there, you can still see that area is still alive. This is a portrait I drew of her trying to get some color into what she might have looked like with her golden hair. And that's Marion looking out in the marshes when they were birding out there off those islands where Carthage College is. And this was Ned, Florence's horse. So you can imagine when she had a pastoral care call, she took Ned, right, to go visit you when you were sick. And Ned was quite a help to her. Now, Florence Buck was a rockin' prophetic minister. She was so far ahead of her time. She did this thing that revolutionized religious education, which at the time, there were few people doing any religious education. And if they were doing it, there were only written texts that they shared, right? Well, she introduced this wild concept called pictures. And then, imagine having pictures at Sunday school, how much you'd want to go to Sunday school. And Sunday school wasn't just for little kids. You went to Sunday school till you were about 30. That might have been the only place if you were a factory worker, if you were a young person wanting to meet other young people, you'd want to get more education, you'd go to religious education, right? And she thought it should be open to everyone. And so she also really wanted people to get these concepts of this revolutionary, amazing prophet called Jesus that she wrote a book about. And so she started this wild concept of these plays and pageants. And so much of what we still do in religious education classes, and if you've ever had a Christmas pageant, or some UU churches do pageants other times a year, that came from Florence Buck. And she would teach other religious ed teachers nationwide about these pageants. So think about that for a second. When I was the intern minister in Kenosha, this was one of their pageants. So that's still in the sanctuary that she preached in. Now, I'm going to read you a reading You don't need to read what's on the slide, so don't worry about it if you can't see it. So I excerpted this from one of her addresses to the annual Unitarian Instructors in Faith Formation Conference. This would be like going to GA or going to Loretta, our UU. This was early Loretta, right? And she was addressing all the religious educators. They would travel. And so this is from one of her addresses in 1919. I want you to consider if any of these concepts sound familiar or totally foreign to you, okay? We are trying to cultivate right responses to the situations which life itself presents. It is necessary, first of all, that we get clearly in our mind our real aim in the church school. It is threefold. I shall indicate the parts of it by 3 short familiar words to aid the memory: know, be, do. Our first aim is that our pupils shall know some of the things needful about religion. This is the knowledge aim of our school. The second aim is that they be the best sort of people. This is the true character aim. Our third aim is that they shall do the best they know. This is the right conduct and service aim. Let me put these terms into more scientific language. Our first aim is that the pupils shall gain fruitful knowledge. We may not try to impart all the knowledge in choosing what we would have them know. We must seek what is valuable for the conduct of life. We seek to develop right attitudes of mind and spirit. This is, we all know, one of the best elements of a liberal faith: one's bent of mind, one's interest and loyalties, one's desire for truth and attitudes which determine the character and what it shall be. Religious instruction which seeks to develop attitudes is very different from that seeks merely to impart rules of life and knowledge of creeds. Out of our turmoil in recent years, now she was referring to World War I, 3 fundamental principles have become clear. Right response is the true basis of human association. She's emphasizing the importance of community in interconnected web. Moral obligations rest upon nations as well as upon individuals. The weak must be protected against the aggressions of the strong. Now, these are essentially religious principles, she says. Every great religious teacher has declared them. They formed the message of the Hebrew prophets, especially the greatest of them all, the founder of Christianity. These principles apply both to governments and to associated groups within governments. That is the whole of life. They are religion in action. They are the core of democracy. I'm going to pause for a minute because amongst the ministers on all of our message systems that we have, people were saying, what are you going to preach about this week based on what happened in Congress this week? And I said, I'm preaching about Florence Buck, and she applies perfectly. Imagine if she told them, these are the principles both to governments and associated groups within governments, that is, to the whole of life. They are religion in action. They are the core of democracy. Taking all aspects of life as religious inspiration, Reverend Dr. Florence Buck welcomed insights from science, encouraged people to find the divine inspiration from their hearts and souls. And in the sermon she gave in Cleveland, The Divineness of Common Things, she taught that the commonplaces of life, the things which are near and familiar, have lessons to teach us, have revelations of God to make human hearts. She cautioned that science is no threat to God's revelation in nature. Rather, nature invites communion with God. Scripture teaches that the place on which we stand, feel your feet, is holy ground. Reverend Dr. Florence Buck frequently taught that our progressive Unitarian faith was not one of just inspirational words, but instead a faith of putting religion into action, saying we are trying to cultivate right responses to situations which life itself presents. The weak must be protected against the aggression of the strong. This is her putting on one of her plays at Star Island, which you can still go to for Unitarian Universalist retreats and conferences. And I like to call what she did bucking the patriarchy. So Florence Buck was an educator. Many have forgotten about her. We talk about Sophia Faz a lot. Sophia Faz attended Florence Buck's classes. We know she went to one of her religious education courses. So just an amazing ancestor for us to learn more about and think about. Now, when I was talking to Jennifer about what I should preach about today, she wanted to know if I had anything on Olympia Brown. And I said, well, I can tell you how they were related, and I will do that today too. Now, that call to Unitarian Universalism happened when she was invited to a service that Marian Murdoch was preaching at People's Church in Kalamazoo. And People's Church was being led by they were only Unitarians then, 2 Unitarian ministers. And one of them, the assistant minister, was Marian Murdoch. And wow, did Florence have quite the taking and liking to Marian Murdoch. Marian had been a minister longer than Florence Buck. She had had pastorates in Iowa and in Illinois and even some in Wisconsin. And in that time, what was happening is there was this guy, Jenkin Lloyd Jones. Does that name sound at all familiar to anyone? Well, his nephew was that guy, Frank Lloyd Wright. So Jenkin Lloyd Jones, many of us say, was the unofficial bishop of Unitarianism. And, you know, he was raised by strong women. There were many women in the Lloyd Jones family that didn't marry. They were all educated, and they were quite taken with Unitarianism. And in fact, there was a time where Unitarianism was going to be called Unity. And you also will see that many of the churches that Frank Lloyd Wright built for Unitarians are titled Unity Temple or Unity Chapel. They saw that faith, our faith, as one that could be the unity of so many different ideas of great prophets coming together for good. Here's Jenkin Lloyd Jones. Now, he saw this Wild West, aka the Midwest, as a place that was rich for Unitarianism, but the ministers that had these very plum pulpits and were paid well along the eastern coast, these men, didn't want to come out here to the West where it was wild, where they didn't have all the civil, comforts that were out here in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so he said, well, I have plenty of women that would be fully capable of becoming Unitarian ministers. And it's really him who pushed this idea to what became Boston, okay? What became the center of the Unitarian Church. It's Jenkin Lloyd Jones that got all these women ordained and helped them go to seminary and offered them scholarships and such. In fact, next week, Sunday, I'm preaching at Unity Chapel in Spring Green that would have been on what we think of as Frank Lloyd Wright's property. It was, before it was his, it was the Lloyds and the Joneses' property, right? So I'm preaching there then. but Jenkins Lloyd-Jones was absolutely integral. And in fact, there were meetings on a regular basis out at that farm where Olympia Brown, who some say is the first woman minister, there's some disagreement on that, but don't tell the people in Racine that. And Florence Buck and Marion Murdoch and some other people we think of as early women heroes in the suffrage movement would all have meetings about how to get the right to vote for women and people of color. They had these meetings out there, right, at the farm. And an interesting thing in my research on Florence Buck that I noticed is that they would have these meetings and they would meet with Jenkins Lloyd-Jones and try to figure out what he was going to say when he met with Wisconsin's legislature, right? Because they weren't allowed to go in. They weren't allowed in the building. Or if they were, they had to sit up in the rafters, right? They weren't allowed on the floor. So they would tell Jenkins Lloyd-Jones everything they wanted him to say. And he would go and represent the women. And so for many years, you see records and minutes from these meetings that took place. And they're in his archives, which are held at Meadville Lombard's archives in Chicago, if you ever want to go there. It's an amazing place to go see a lot of our Unitarian history. And so absolutely, Florence Buck preached at the Racine Church. She preached for these people in Muskego, Wisconsin. They all knew each other, and they all went to these conferences together and such, and they were friends. Now, something that I notice in the history is that about the same time that the women doing the suffrage movement decided to go for the vote for white women, I don't see Florence Buck attending those meetings as often. And something you should know about Florence Buck is that throughout her writings, it talks about having education, rights, and civil liberties for people of all nations and all religions. And she even has one sermon she gave where she talks about how we know that missions were in vogue in the past, and we don't do that anymore because we know it's wrong to take over someone else's religion and say ours is better. Now that just took me, because of course we still, in Unitarian churches today, will hear people say, well, we're better than them, right? She was saying we never should be saying that. We should be saying, how can we draw from one another? How can we come together? And we, of course, know missions whose primary aim was to take over someone's religion, I want to give that qualification, still go on today, right? So now, Marion Murdoch was very excited that Florence Buck was interested in the ministry when she heard this. And you can imagine the difference between these two women is that Florence Buck was always very eloquent and very thoughtful and had beautiful handwriting. And Marion Murdoch would have been the one that would have put 80 names on an email and hit reply to all over and over. And you can see it in her correspondence because there's letters handwritten. Oh, I didn't mean that. What I really meant was blah, 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 blah. And she writes over and over. But when they first found each other, they went and they took a trip. Now, I can't imagine how hard this must have been. But they took a trip to go visit all the places that Marion Murdoch had been a preacher, to Iowa, to Illinois, to Wisconsin, around Michigan. And then in the archives in Kalamazoo, it talks about how she was planning to leave that church, which was fascinating because she'd just gotten the job and she could have been a second called minister there. She wasn't there very long. But she wanted to go with Florence to go to Meadville Seminary, which was in Pennsylvania. And she wanted Florence to become a Unitarian minister. And that did all happen.
And after that happened, at one point they held one pastorate together in Cleveland, Ohio, and there was a women's column, a women's page of the newspaper they were written up in. And the reporter asked if they needed 2 ministers to hold that pastorate, because that's how many women were needed to do the work of one man. And Florence Buck responded, no, no, no. We are going to make a better ministerial team because there will be 2 of us and we have different talents and different expertise, and we will be able to do, twice the work at this church. So there are still buildings in Kenosha where you can walk, where Florence Buck and Marion Murdoch and Olympia Brown all used to take classes and preach. These were the homes that they lived in. Florence and Marion rented one room together. Now, it was talked about that that's all that they could afford, because they had a woman's minister's salary, which was about 90% less than what a man's minister's salary was. Now, you might think that's all over in our faith. However, we do regularly still see that often big pulpits are not given to women or LGBT people or people of color in our faith. So even though we say we've got it all done, there's still work to do. Some are, but it's not as prevalent as you might think. And people in our faith still talk about ways that they are pushed and asked different things. So we're working on it, and things have improved, but it's not all done, all right? You would regularly see women ministers running up and down the stairs of their churches. They would teach RE and handle the service all at the same time. And so we'd regularly see women together. Now, these are the Simmons children with Florence and Marion. If you go around Library Square in Kenosha, these are some of the houses that were there that are right near where the church is in Kenosha. And this is the lookout place that they had, what is now on Carthage's campus, for birding and stuff. And look at the elegance of the picnic. That they would bring a picnic and stay for the day and talk about nature and science. Now, this is the church, and Florence oversaw building the church in Kenosha. So she had this amazing donor. The church ended up costing about 7 times what they thought it would. Of course, he wanted to keep adding things on. There was a period of time where they were in that church, then a long, long period of Kenosha's history where they were not in that church, and then later got it back. That church has also been a library. It was the children's library in Kenosha for a while. It was also a restaurant. But they are back there now, and you can go worship there again. Now, there was a lot of talk about what to name the church after it was built. The new church was built. And Florence talked a lot about how she cared far more about how people acted and showed their faith than about how famous they were. And so that is another thing that pointed to how she always was about religion and action. And there's lots of stuff in the archives about dedicating that church when they rebuilt it. Here's a picture of some of the teen dances that went on there. These are some of the books that Florence wrote.
Now, for a little while after she was at the Kenosha Church, she went to California because Marian's health had some kind of issues. We're not sure what. But they thought that the California air would be better for her, so they moved to California. And then after that, Florence was so revolutionary in how she taught about religion that she was asked to go to Boston and become the first director of religious education. But she was a woman, so they called her the associate director, even though she really was the top person. And so that's how she came to be the person teaching all these religious educators. And we often think of Sophia Faz as the founder of how we teach religious education. But Sophia Faz was certainly at the seminars that Florence Buck put together and taught. Florence Buck had many accolades. She was the first woman to preach at King's Chapel. You can still go to King's Chapel if you go on a Boston Unitarian tour ever, or just want to go there for church when you're in Boston. She was the first woman to be given an honorary doctorate. So she has many amazing accolades. For a little while, she and Marian were some of the first women to go to Oxford Seminary and study there for a while. So she just had an endless list of accolades. But she was always about putting religion into action and speaking about equality and equity before those words were the words that we used. And she had huge religious education classes. Now, this was a time there wasn't OSHA. There were no protections, sort of like what some people in the government are trying to go for now. And young people were getting hurt. They weren't able to make enough money. They were in very dangerous conditions if they were working. And she would try to get them to come to the church school. And it was truly called a school. For some people, they might not have gone to public education. It existed, but they might not have gone, or they didn't go very long. So our religious education classes were another way to become educated. And she would tell ministers that if you really wanted to build your church, and if you really wanted a thriving church, you would focus as much of your resources as possible on religious education, and that would in turn build the church rather than the other way around. You needed to build up young people to have a thriving church. Now, Florence Buck died early. She was 65, but by then you would have thought she would have lived a little longer. She had opportunities for health care and things like that. And even though she was quite poor as a woman, she also was well educated and she knew about science. And when she died, Boston named a big room after her at the AUA. That's what it was called before it was the UUA, the American Unitarian Association. And then I found this amazing clipping. So it was interesting to me because I found all these records of her being sought after to speak all over the country, and her traveling by train and by streetcar and then by horse to go and walking to go to all these different conferences. And then we kind of see with that moment where the suffrage movement and the temperance movement kind of split, and I don't see her speaking as often. And I also know that the first head of the AUA was wildly domineering, and he didn't like her involved in all that suffrage stuff. And I wondered what she did with her values. And I'm also hearing people today, I'm hearing my LGBTQ siblings and my BIPOC siblings all ask, well, what are we going to do with what's happening? What are we going to do with what's happening in our world? And I think to myself, we're going to do what our ancestors did, and they found a way. And so in this clipping, what it says is that it turns out while Florence was living in Boston as the head of religious education for the AUA for all those years, which was about 20 years, it turned out she was going to these Black Baptist churches to teach religious education.
and no one really knew about it. And she was going to neighborhoods that they didn't think she belonged in, and she had this deep, profound relationship with all of these families and children. And they wrote to the AUA and let them know that they were going to build a chapel and name it after Florence Buck. Not quite yet, sorry. So, I hope that you can hold, if you have a love of science that our ancestors did too, that you can always use nature as your inspiration. She taught that the work of Jesus was prophetic, and she meant following Jesus, not different Christian churches. She really meant Jesus. She was wildly active on the suffrage speaking circuit. She loved building new churches and helping youth education, and she thought that helping our young people, and to her young people was a pretty wide range, to be able to form character was very important. And so for all of those things, I think that we should hold this ancestor in our heart and ask ourselves, what can we do that's like Florence Buck? How can we buck it? How can we buck the patriarchy? How can we think about the ways she honored science and religion all together? Many of the issues that we're grappling with here today, she faced. Slightly different, but not so much. So may we all live up to examples like our ancestor Florence Buck provided. Amen. Please join me in singing hymn number 146, Soon the Day Will Arrive.
Before we conclude our service with a benediction and final song, I'd like to thank everyone who made this service possible, and again invite you to join us afterward for coffee and conversation downstairs in the fellowship hall. We now mark the end of our communal gathering by extinguishing the chalice. It's a reminder to all of us that while the physical flame goes out, the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment continue in each of our lives and actions beyond the sanctuary. Today's and closing words are brought to us by Reverend Dr. Florence Buck, adapted by Reverend Denise Cawley. Please join me in unison as prompted on the slide after the following words. We extinguish this flame, taking its spark into our whole life, These principles have scarcely begun in the world at large. Even where the democratic aim has reached its highest, it may still be improved and must always be maintained. We carry this light when putting our just actions into our world.
Thank you, Aaron. May these concepts of not just equality for all genders, ages, and races live in us as an idea, but may it be something we are willing to be uncomfortable to birth into being here and now. May we know our goal is not equality, but equity for all. And this is not easy, friends. Listen to new voices, look to new sources, hear new truths. Blessed be on your week. Amen.
Yes, hello? Wow, while he was getting that on, this is a song about having somebody in your life who is a hero and realizing at some point that the tables have turned and you have to be a hero to them. Looking back on all that you've done for me, would you choose to change anything? You were once young and fearless like I am today. Would you still walk that path or travel another way? I see places and faces of ones I've known, memories etched in my mind like a brilliant stone. I wouldn't trade my life for chance, another road. Every choice I made has led me to your door. I wanna be your hero. I wanna keep you safe from harm. You showed me what it was to have strength, so let me help you carry on. I can tell your eyes are tired and worn. Roll me dusty miles, led you far from home. I know all too well how it feels to be alone. I'll take your hand, together we'll wade the storm. I wanna be your hero. I wanna keep you safe from harm. I'll give you strength, I'll give you strength. A hero to help you, a hero to help you, a hero to help you carry on. Thank you.